Hi, I'm Lyn Ulbricht, and I'm really honored to be here with so many qualified people. My qualification, I'm Ross Ulbricht's mother. But that has given me a crash course in the drug war and what I think it's really about. My son Ross is a peaceful person. He has no history of violence whatsoever, and yet the judge sentenced him to a double life without parole, plus 40 years for all nonviolent charges. He's an example of what's going on in the war on drugs. The government wants to cage Ross for life for creating and allegedly running a website. So everyone who has a website that might be interesting to the government should take note of the precedent that is being set here. The precedent is that a website host can be held criminally liable for activity on his or her site. Ross is in prison, not for selling a product, but for creating a platform. The site was Silk Road. It was an Amazon-style online marketplace that operated anonymously on the dark net with Tor and used the cryptocurrency Bitcoin. It was essentially a free and open market where vendors and buyers could pretty much sell and buy whatever they wanted. However, there were restrictions. The site was based on the principle of everything being voluntary, so the administration restricted things that created victims, such as forbidden were child pornography. There was no child pornography. There were no stolen goods. You couldn't hire a hitman on Silk Road. Nothing that created victims. There are many legal things sold, but also illegal, including a lot of drugs. Now, I said allegedly running because Ross has pled not guilty to that. The trial was a travesty. It is now being appealed. The investigation was riddled with corruption. There are two corrupt federal agents in prison right now for their activities on the site and their ability to tamper with material on the site, as well as stealing over $1 million. And recently, since trial, the proof has been found that evidence was tampered with. And there's a whole lot more that you can read about at freeross.org. Now, before Ross was arrested, I didn't really think much about the drug war. It wasn't really on my radar. My kids didn't have a drug problem. They hadn't gotten in trouble about drugs. And so I didn't really think about it. And then all of a sudden, my son was the poster boy of the drug war, or at least as it's gone digital. And so I was propelled into the crash course I told you about, where I've learned a lot. And I was talking recently with Ross about the drug war, and he made the point. He said, you know, no decent person would wish that destructive drugs like heroin or crystal meth existed. The trouble is when you use government force to fulfill your wishes, first of all, it doesn't work, and it compounds the misery involved. They can't even stop drug dealing and drug use in the prisons. So the drug war has not worked. It's been over 45 years now, over $1 trillion. And I've asked myself, you know, well, if it's such a failure, why doesn't the government try a new strategy? Why don't they do something that works? And I've come to the conclusion that it's not such a failure after all. Just consider what it's accomplished. See the results. If you want to make a lot of money, you want to expand government power and the ability to intrude, the drug war has been a resounding success. Unfortunately, in the process, countless lives have been destroyed, $1 trillion has been wasted, and our constitutional protections have been terribly weakened. The drug war started out by ignoring the Constitution, and it's continued on from there. When the government wanted to prohibit alcohol use, it passed the 19th Amendment, a constitutional amendment, and then 13 years later, when it realized it wasn't working, because prohibition never does, it passed the 21st Amendment to repeal prohibition. Well, with the drug war, the government hasn't bothered with all that. They've just declared the drug war and given themselves the authority to wage it And one of the obvious casualties of it is the erosion of the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment is the document that protects our privacy. And in this day and age, privacy is a huge issue. And it's a major part of Ross's appeal because unconstitutional warrants and sometimes no warrants were used in his case. And his defense isn't the only one saying this. The National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers and EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation, joined Ross's appeal to say, yes, these are unconstitutional warrants and should not be allowed. And Ross's case isn't unique. You can't even begin to calculate the number of people who have had property seized, been searched with unlawful, improper warrants, not to mention illegal surveillance, unlawful wiretapping, raiding homes with SWAT teams on flimsy evidence, sometimes seriously harming people, and all under the name of the drug war, so it's all okay. And this is basically what happened to Ross. The government essentially said that because drugs are involved, they could pretty much do whatever they wanted. They could ignore his due process rights in trial or trample on them. They could keep the jury from knowing about corrupt investigators. They could smear his name with unproven and uncharged allegations and many more violations. This sets a very dangerous precedent. And now there's an entrenched and generally accepted drug exception in the courts where if drugs are involved, the Constitution essentially takes a back seat. One lawyer called this the get out of your constitutional obligations free card for law enforcement and prosecutors. Thurgood Marshall in 1989 saw the slippery slope that the drug war was putting us on, and he dissented in a Supreme Court decision that was a drug testing case that used the drug exception. And he said, no, there is no drug exception to the Constitution. There's no exception. And principles of law, once bent, do not snap back easily. So, what is the result of this overreach and this bending of the principle of law? Which doesn't only affect drug cases, by the way. Once law is bent and damaged, it filters into all kinds of cases. Well, it's given the United States the dubious honor of caging more of its citizens than any nation on the face of the earth. This is the land of the free. As this chart illustrates, the prison population since the 80s and the drug war has metastasized. 500% is the latest figure I've seen. 2.2 million people in prison. This is a 500% increase, and over half of these people, well over half, are nonviolent drug offenders, and the main drug involved is marijuana. The U.S. has 5% of the world's population and 25% of its prisoners. There are more people under correctional supervision in the United States than were in the Gulag Archipelago under Stalin at its height, according to the book Caging of America. So what are some of the policies that have reaped this evil and tragic harvest? Mandatory minimums, which take judicial discretion away from judges in sentencing, longer sentences, and a spike in life sentences have all crammed our prisons to overflowing. Now, according to the Sentencing Project, life sentences have quintupled. There are 5 times as many as were in 1984 and the drug war. 1 in 7 prisoners are sentenced to die in prison. 1 in 7. Over 17,000 of those people that are serving life sentences like Ross is are nonviolent people who, like Ross, have never physically harmed or threatened anyone. And now, because there's no parole in the federal system, again since the 80s, life means life. And Ross said to me, he said, "Mom, a life sentence is a death sentence. It just takes longer." Now, this is a quote from The Atlantic by former federal judge Nancy Gertner, who is now a law professor at Harvard. And Judge Gertner said that the vast majority of the sentences she had to impose over the 17 years she served on the bench were unjustified. And she believes Ross's is too, which is why she joined Ross's appeal, challenging that sentence, as did Drug Policy Alliance, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, and Just Leadership USA, who said this sentence is excessive, barbaric, and unfair. And taxpayers are footing the bill for housing all of these people for life. There's a lot of money being generated, more than $80 billion a year on this system. And so there's people who are very interested in keeping it going. Now, who is that? I think you can get a good idea from this list, the top 5 anti-marijuana legalization groups. First, we have the private prisons, where human beings are inventory. They have lockup quotas that they have to meet that gives them every incentive to keep those cages full. You can invest in human beings on Wall Street, even if you're a judge and a prosecutor, by investing in these private prisons. I would like someone to explain to me how this is not human trafficking or even slavery. Then you have the police unions and the prison guard unions. One person wrote, "The drug war is not a war, it's a jobs program." And Mark Victor writes about how he had a law enforcement officer say to him, "Yeah, I'm for the drug war. I'd be unemployed without the drug war." The FBI data shows that there are more arrests for marijuana possession than for all violent crimes combined. Wow, I feel safer, don't you? I'm terrified of those pot smokers. I'm so glad they're behind bars, and don't worry about the violent people. Then there's asset forfeiture, which comes to billions of dollars that the government in various agencies seizes from citizens, often unconvicted, under the name of the drug war. Next on the list are pharmaceutical corporations and alcohol and beer companies. Well, what better way to eliminate the competition than to keep it illegal? And not on the list, but worth mentioning, are the violent cartels, the violent drug cartels that infest our cities and are attracted and are able to have the power they do because of the artificially inflated prices that drugs get. And there's also the banks, like HSBC, who launder billions of dollars in drug money, and nobody went to jail. They paid a fine. So unless you measure the human costs, the drug war is quite successful. But of course, there are terrible human costs. Statistics are real people. Ross is one of them. I am one of them, because I can tell you, when you have a loved one in prison, the whole family is doing time. Here I am going to the prison to visit Ross, which I do regularly, and I've gotten to know the other families and the children. And the children are the real heartbreak. They come so excited and enthusiastic about seeing their dad. A lot of them have a little t-shirt, "I love my dad," and they're just jumping up and down with enthusiasm. And when we get upstairs, they leap into his arms and they're crawling all over him and sitting in his lap and just clinging to him. And then after our measly hour, they're torn away from him. And it's a very different child going back down in that elevator. They're crying, they're brokenhearted, they're wounded. These children are being hurt. And there are 2.9 million of them with an incarcerated parent in this country. And 2/3 of those parents are non-violent, mostly drug offenders. And there's a terrible ripple effect from this. Judge Gertner said, "We know that the sons and daughters of the people we sentenced are now in trouble with the criminal justice system." But hey, That's guaranteed inventory for the people making money off of this drug war and this system. So no problem with that. Plenty of future inventory. I had the privilege of speaking in Eastern Europe about a year and a half ago, and I visited the concentration camp Auschwitz in Poland. And here I am at Auschwitz. It was an incredibly grim and impactful experience to be there and to actually experience a place where people did this to other people. It was hard to believe it even happened. And I overheard a tour guide say to his group, "The lesson here is watch your politicians. This wasn't that long ago." Now, I'm not implying that where Ross is comparable to Auschwitz, although the UN has called MCC torture. But it's not Auschwitz. However, concentration camps and gulags were created by governments who claimed they were doing the greater good also, and who were fulfilling wishes with force also. We need to pay attention to what's happening here and where we're going. We need to end the drug war. It's a national disgrace, and it's a crime against humanity. Here is my son, Ross, in prison. He is a danger to no one, and he has a lot to contribute. Like so many, he is being warehoused. His life is being wasted to no good end, but at great cost. If you're interested in his case and learning more, please visit our website, freeross.org. If you're so moved, please help us in this fight. And not just for Ross, but for the precedents that are being set with this case that will impact all of us. If you care about your constitutional protections and you're against this drug war, helping us is a good way to help make a change. Thank you.